Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Opinion Machine, the show where we talk about all things gaming, and my name is Killjoy, and I'm still a bit ill, so I do apologise for the croaky voice, but today we're going to ask the question, is the Metroid series actually part of the genre known as Metroidvania? Now this is a contested topic, we shall say, between me and some other people, and I just want to offer up a potential look at this from a different angle. So, for me, the description of Metroidvania doesn't really work with the way that the term is designed. The idea is it's taking elements from both Metroid and Castlevania. But, as we'll read here on Wikipedia, obviously the most reliable source on the internet, this gives a good indication as to what the term means. But what the term means and what the term is designed to be, Metroid and Castlevania, I feel doesn't really convey the points of the Castlevania side through a lot of this. So let's read what Wikipedia has in these first two paragraphs, and then I will go over and offer up why I think Metroid is not a Metroidvania, and we'll go from there. So, start off. Metroidvania is a subgenre of action-adventure video games focused on guided non-linearity and utility-gated exploration and progression. Pretty straightforward. Sums it up quite nicely. The term is a portmanteau of the names of the video game series Metroid and Castlevania, with games in the genre borrowing from both series. Typically based on two-dimensional side-scrolling platform gameplay, Metroidvania games feature a large interconnected world map that the player can explore. Through access to parts of the world is often limited by doors or other obstacles that can only be passed once the player has acquired special items, tools, weapons, abilities, or knowledge within the game. Acquiring such improvements can also aid the player in defeating more difficult enemies and locating shortcuts and secret areas, and often includes retracing one's steps across the map. Through this, Metroidvania games include tighter integration of story and level design, careful design of levels and character controls to encourage exploration and experimentation, and a means for the player to become more invested in the player character through role-playing elements. So what we've basically seen there is we've got non-linearity, even though it's kind of a focused experience, as in there is a start and an end point, but to get there is not necessarily the most straightforward way. Gated exploration and progression, as in you need items like a double jump or a boost or a teleport, things that will help you, you can come across things in the world you can't deal with at the time, but you can come back once you have the right weapons, and that allows you to get secrets, things like that. A lot of it's focused on the character and the levels being integrated into the story. Alright, all makes sense so far. The first Metroid game in 1986 established principles of the non-linear platformer that were redefined through multiple iterations, with Super Metroid in 1994 considered to have polished the style of gameplay core to Metroidvanias. Castlevania Symphony of the Night in 1997 is considered the defining Metroidvania game, incorporating role-playing game elements from the Legend of Zelda series with non-linear traversal within the Castlevania series. That's just bear that in mind. Symphony of the Night incorporated role-playing game elements similar to the Legend of Zelda series, as well as the non-linear traversal. Most subsequent Castlevania games followed this approach excuse me, and refined the game. Symphony of the Night's assistant director Igarashi is credited with establishing key principles of Metroidvanias through his work on other Castlevania games, and then so on about the resurgence in the 2000s. Alright, here is why I personally have issues with the Metroidvania title being used on a Metroid game. Metroid does not have RPG elements unless you include the fact that you can gain an item as like an RPG upgrade. Technically that's not how it works. They act more like keys that can also be used in combat a lot of the time. Castlevania Symphony of the Night added the ability for leveling up, switching out items, I think basically other RPG elements like that. Having cards as well, I think that might be one of the other Castlevania games. But the Castlevania part, or the Vania part in Metroidvania, is primarily to do with Castlevania Symphony of the Night and the other games that have come since then, and they are focused on the RPG elements of those games. Metroid does not have RPG elements in it. There is no leveling up, there is no experience points, there is no switching out weapons. Like, yes, you can turn on and off things in Super Metroid, so that is doable. But there's not like, I have a sword, this sword has better stats, there's no stat to, you know, there's nothing like that. It's just, everything has like its use, and it works more like keys. And so, when people are like, oh yeah, Metroid clearly is a Metroidvania. No, Metroid is a Metroid game. There's no Vania part of Metroid. Like, there's no like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, get this different like upgrades, and I can switch out the armor because this has got better defense, but this one gives me higher attack power. None of that. And I think this is the problem with what Metroidvania means in the gaming industry and what Metroidvania should mean. Like, if you've got a game, I don't know, I haven't played Hollow Knight, but I'm going to assume Hollow Knight is more of a Metroid game than a Vania game. I don't know if there are RPG elements in it. If there is, then it is a Metroidvania. But a lot of these games that come out that are classed as Metroidvanias, if they don't have RPG mechanics, if they don't have leveling up, they don't have skill points and switching out gear, they are more of a Metroid clone or a Metroid-inspired action-adventure than they are a Metroidvania. And this is something that I think is, to me, is quite obvious. I think this is quite obvious, that the term Metroidvania is a lot more specific for those games that do use elements from both games. But, like the Mummy Demastered, for example, on Switch, that is a Metroid clone. That is not a Metroidvania. There are no RPG elements in that. You gain, it's basically their version of a Metroid game. And so, you know, I've taken my flack and lumps for this, and I stand by that. I really do believe that Metroid isn't a Metroidvania. When you actually break it down and realize that the whole point of this genre was to take elements from both games, Metroid doesn't take elements from Castlevania. So, excuse me. So we have this term that is used to describe a very specific style of action-adventure game. I mean, Metroidvania itself, as a term, is actually a really bad term, along with Souls-like and roguelikes and stuff. But that is a video for another day. Those terms, like the actual term itself, doesn't really do a very good job of telling someone what the game is. Action-adventure, admittedly, isn't necessarily isn't much better, but at least people are going to understand the difference between, you know, you say to someone, oh, it's an action-adventure game, it's like, you know, probably got platforming and fast-paced, that kind of thing. But this idea that Metroid has this Metroid is a Metroidvania, it can't be. Like, at its fundamental level, it can't be a Castlevania game. There are no RPG elements. And that's what I find really baffling. This term that I've read you, that is on Wikipedia, is what the gaming industry clearly uses to describe 2D games with these inspirations. But how can you put that label on a game that doesn't have half of the subgenre? If Metroid had, you know, like I said, those RPG mechanics, fair enough, but there is no Metroid game like that. If they bring out one in the future that lets you have things, I'm like, fair enough, that's a Metroidvania. But as it stands, a Metroid game, any of the Metroid games are not Metroidvanias. At its core, the terminology of what Metroidvania is meant to be, borrowing elements of Metroid and Castlevania, that does not exist in Metroid. And that's, I think, to me, that just makes sense. That makes sense in my head. I don't understand why people can't see it. I mean, fair enough. This term has been used throughout the gaming industry for so long that it's just basically anything that resembles, you know, gated progression and all that. But we're missing the fundamental point here, that the Vania part of it comes from the RPG elements. If you play a game that is inspired by those games but doesn't have those RPG elements, that's more of a Metroid clone or a Metroid style game, action adventure game, rather than a Metroidvania. You know, maybe it's just a laziness thing. You know, like if I say to someone, oh, this game's like a Metroidvania, and they've played other games similar to it, they're gonna know what I mean. But it's just kind of a shorthand, lazy side of what I actually mean is, oh, is this game got those RPG elements? Oh yeah, that is a Metroidvania. Does it not? It's more of a Metroid clone, surely. That's just my take on it. You know, entirely possible that, you know, I'm expecting people to disagree from now until the rest of the time on this, because I really do think this is something that we've just kind of got lumped both these games together, and we're just like, oh, Metroidvania, that makes sense. But my original point, are the Metroid games actually Metroidvanias? I don't think they are. And I'll stand by that. That's a hill I'm willing to die on. If you put RPG mechanics in it, fair enough. But up until this point, none of the Metroid games have that. So Metroid is not a Metroidvania. It is a Metroid game. And I think that's pretty straightforward. But I am curious as to why people think it wouldn't be. You know, feel free to comment that down below. Because, you know, I look at this and I just see this as, well, you're missing one half of the genre. So why would it be in that genre? You know, so there is no Castlevania RPG elements in Metroid, so surely it's not that. But, you know, that's just one man's opinion. But yeah, this is something I've been thinking about for a while. And you know what, I'm finally done with it. I'm gonna put it out into the world and see how people respond to this, because, you know, like most things, people probably won't care, but that's okay. If you are someone who has an opinion in your thoughts on it, if you agree with me, let me know. If you disagree with me, let me know. It's fine. You know, it's just one of those things that I think is, when you actually break it down and think about it, Metroid isn't a Metroidvania. It's a Metroid game. There is no Vania side to it. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching, as always. If you like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content like this, hit subscribe. Links for Facebook and Twitter will be down below in the description, as always. And until next video, I will see you then.